I think there is some technical glitches. Yeah, sir is here.
All right. Can you
Yeah,
hear
yeah.
me?
Yes, sir. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I had to change some settings so that my
Hmm.
computer can. All right. Now, can you
Yeah.
see my PowerPoint?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right, everyone. So, thank you for being here again. Sorry for the trouble. Uh, let's start with the research process. Uh, when we are working on, when we are asking questions, see, the thing is that most of the times, research process is very closely connected to our lives. To our media environment. Being students of all of us are students of media, mass communication, journalism, communication. All these areas. Uh, we ask certain kind of questions. Okay. So we will talk about the kind of questions we ask. We'll talk a bit about the research process in general, and then how it connects to different kind of methodological approaches. Okay, so uh, so if you think about how you come to a topic, if you are, I don't know if you ever face a problem finding a topic, but for someone like me, whenever I feel or trying to work
I
on.
would, sir, I would just interrupt.
Mhm.
There are participants. I'm requesting participants to please mute them. Please do not present or unmute yourself during the ongoing of the lecture, as it really interrupts and the noise disturbs the whole the whole proceedings. I would kindly request all the participants to please mute themselves and during the process of the lecture, please do not unmute yourself. Later on, after both of our speakers will complete their lectures, we'll take up the question answer session. I would request all of you, if you have got questions, kindly write it down in the chat box. We'll take each and every questions before the resource person with us. Okay. Thank you, sir. Over to you, Dr.
Okay.
Srivastava.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. All right. So see, one of the problems, and I think it was someone like probably, uh, you know, um, a bigger problem for someone like me. Uh, I had, during my education in India, uh, no one ever like we never had. I did my MBA, I did my bachelor's here, but no one ever taught us how to write a paper, or how to write a research paper. So one of the problems, and I think that has always been the biggest problem, uh, has been to find a topic. Okay, so and then and so sometimes what would happen that I would look at or try to find a topic from real life, and then try to develop it. Then there were times when I would read a research paper, or I would be interested in a theory, and I would look at different research that is being done in that area, and then based on that research I will try to find a connecting topic, a connected topic, or a topic that was an extension of a previous topic. Okay. So, so there had been, different approaches, but today I'll just look in a very linear fashion. Okay. So when you think about the research process, you identify a topic. Okay. Um, identify a methodological approach, a theoretical and a methodological approach. So basically, when you're identifying a topic, you are asking question, okay, a simple question, okay, and we will look at nature of questions later. Okay, so these are questions which help you understand something in your everyday life. Okay, And remember, in media studies, in media journalism, communication, in all these areas, a lot of times you are asking very basic questions. Okay, and and people say, like, what's the big deal? So, for example, you say, I want to see if this particular newspaper compared to this particular newspaper is covering certain kind of content more. Okay, and then you talk to people, and people will say, that everyone knows that it does, or we know this newspaper is biased, or we know that this source is not biased. Okay, uh, and so your job is, so does that mean that you don't conduct that study? you know uh, no, it does. It just means that it's an important question, and when you conduct a study, you prove that that bias is there. You prove the nature of the bias. Okay. um, so so after you've figured out a theory, you figured out a method, you start thinking about research questions. What are these questions? Now remember, uh, and I will be talking mostly about quantitative research. So for quantitative research, questions have to be very specific. Okay. So most commonly, things are compared, associations are measured. So those are two of the primary, things that you are testing in different ways. You are coming from different directions and so on. Okay. So once you have formed your research questions, and these are very important, research questions, hypothesis, or, let's just say problem statements. Okay, where you have a clear understanding of what your variables are. Okay, so if someone asks me, what's your research question, then I would want to be very clear what my variables are, because these are the things you are comparing. Your variables, these are the things you are measuring association between. Okay, so it's very, very important that we understand what our variables are. We'll talk a bit about them, what variables are, how we can think about them. Once you have figured out the variables, then you figure out how you measure them. How will you collect data? Okay. How will we develop instruments? For example, coding manuals for content analysis, or surveys for survey research, experimental setups, stimulus and questionnaires and all other kind of measurements for experimental research. Once those are figured out, then you go for execution. You do whatever you have to do. So if you are conducting a content analysis, you analyze content. If you are conducting a survey, you send out your survey, you collect data. If you are if you are if you are conducting experiments, you run your experiments, you bring your participants to the lab, or you conduct an online experiment and collect data. Okay. Once you have the data, then you analyze the data, mostly using statistical techniques, and based on the findings, you interpret the data. Okay. So basically, in the start, you ask a question, and in the end, you have been able to answer it, because you asked the questions, you refined the questions, you developed instruments, or you got instruments, you collected data, you ran analysis, and you interpreted the data. Okay. So how do so after identifying the topic, the second thing is identifying a theoretical or methodological approach. Now, how do you find or identify a theoretical or methodological approach? Okay. What kind of approaches are there? So there are two major approaches. Okay. So there's qualitative research, where you don't exactly try to get into numbers. You focus on examining the whole process with the objective of examining a given situation or individuals. You don't try to generalize. Sampling is not that big a deal. So most of the times you try to understand a specific population, a specific group. Okay. Quantitative research, on the other hand, observations are expressed primarily in numerical terms. So you So you generate data in form of numbers. Okay? Your observations are converted into numbers. Okay, so it focuses on identifying components, gaining knowledge of the whole by looking at parts. So a lot of times for quantitative research, you break things down into variables, you break things down into sub processes, you ask very specific questions. Um, but the benefit you get with quantitative research is that it's probably a better way when you are trying to generalize to findings to a larger population. Okay, so for example, if I want to, so let's say I'm conducting a study and I want to understand what's happening, how, let's say, villages in how one village in let's say West Bengal is using social media. Okay, and then we study that village using qualitative methods, and we will talk about what qualitative methods are, and we get a deeper sense of how that particular village is using information or social media. However, if we want to understand how a wider range, how all the villages in West Bengal are using social media, it would probably be a better idea to have a quantitative component. Okay, where you take, where you collect data from a sample of villages and then use that data. If your sample is good enough, then there is a good degree of, you can say with a good degree of confidence that that your findings represent, represent the whole of the whole rural West Bengal. Okay, so now one of the things which generalization gives you is that it helps you explain, it gives you sense of a wider population. It also helps you predict things. Okay, so so based on the data you may have, so for example, let's say in intervention research, a lot of times when you do health campaigns, for example, let's say you want to increase awareness about wearing masks during COVID-19 and washing hands. Okay, and you have different ways, so you say, all right, so should we have advertising that where doctors talk about so let's say television advertising where doctors talk about using masks, or should we have television advertising where you see women in the household using masks when they are going grocery shopping, or teaching their kids how to wear masks, or or should we have advertising where we have gram pradhans or block pramukhs wearing masks, or should we have advertising where we have prime minister of the country addressing people and asking them to wear masks. Now there are all these things you can do, but if you conduct a study and if you measure effectiveness, then you might find that one way of doing it is better than the other way. Okay, and then you can say, I think it's a good idea if we run this particular campaign, okay, in the whole population, because it's going to be more effective. Okay, so prediction. So in this particular case, your study predicted that that one of the 4 campaign ideas will help create a more effective campaign, and so it helps you. It in that case helps you save a lot of money, because if you are just running campaigns without understanding how effective it is going to be, it might actually not work at all. And if that happens, then all the money you have put in, that is going to waste. Okay, so qualitative research, qualitative research, very good if you want to get a deeper understanding of a smaller group of of certain phenomena. Quantitative research, very effective when you want to generalize findings, when you want to get understanding of a wider population and what's happening in it. Okay, some examples of quantitative and qualitative methods. So qualitative methods are case studies, okay, participant observations, okay, focus groups, and interviews. Quantitative methods, some of the primary methods are survey research, where you send out questionnaire, collect data, content analysis. Now, remember, content analysis can be both. So there is qualitative content analysis as well as quantitative content analysis. Okay, so in quantitative content analysis, you collect data in form of numbers. Okay, in qualitative, you don't get into numbers that much. Okay, experimental research, again, a quantitative method. So when you are thinking about problem statements, okay, so now we are kind of restricting ourselves to quantitative approaches. Problem statements must be clear, and we will look at some examples. Okay, uh, except for simple exploratory studies, they should include at least two variables. Must be testable. No personal value judgments. Must be grammatical. Could be either in question or statement format. Okay, so number one, must be unambiguous. They should be clear. So if you look at these examples, what do you think about the following problem statements question? Okay, does framing change with time? Okay, so it's you're looking at, it's a media framing question, but all right, but if you look at it, what kind of framing? What is the time frame? What do you mean by time? Does what kind of media we are talking about? Okay, so a lot of things are not very specific here. Okay, similarly, the second question: what is the relationship between credibility and memory? Okay, now credibility of what? Or memory of what? Uh, and what kind of memory? So there may be different kind of memory measures. So it's not very clear. Okay, uh, uh, then they should include at least two variables. Now, variable is a characteristic that varies, so that has more than one value. Okay, so for example, gender, at least two values. Okay, so let's say male, female, or three or more. Male, female, others. Duration of media exposure. Okay, so it could vary. So you can say 1 hour, 2 hour, 1 day, 2 day. So so this is a value that can vary, among people. So some people might be, exposing themselves to media or using media for certain amount of time. So let's say someone does it for 2 hours a week, someone else does it 20 hours a week. Okay? So that's a value that varies. Okay, natures of frames. Okay, so media framing, different kind of frames. So frames vary. Message effectiveness varies. Okay, so if person A watches a message or consumes a message, it might be very effective on him, but it may not have the same effect on some other person. So the effectiveness is varying. News credibility, believability of a news item, it may vary within people. Okay, so these are variables. Okay, for which values may vary or values may change. Okay. Um, uh, then so within variables, okay, you have independent variables and dependents. So independent variables are not a consequence of something else within the framework of a theory. Dependent variables are consequence of something else within the framework of a theory. Okay, so so um, so essentially, when in the theory you are saying, if you increase message credibility, message effectiveness will increase. Okay, so then you are saying, all right, so as credibility increases, message effectiveness increases too. So two things. So there are two variables here. Okay, message credibility and message effectiveness. Okay, so message credibility is in this particular case independent variable, because according to the theory or according to to your argumentation, increase in increase in message credibility is leading to message effectiveness. Okay, so effectiveness dependent variable, credibility is independent variable in this particular case. Now, um, another thing is that your problem statement must be testable. It must have the scope for more than one answers. Okay? So, for example, you have questions like, do news editors influence the quality of news? Okay. Now, that's not a very good question. It's because it's not testable. It's yes. The answer is simple. Do news editors influence the quality of news? Yes, they do. That's their job. So it doesn't help you much. Okay. Now, if you get deeper into it, if you, uh, so for this question, you have only one answer, yes. So if you have only one answer, then why are you even asking that question? Okay. So there have to be, there has to be scope for more than one answer. So, for example, if you say, if you're interested in looking at a particular way in which news editors may influence the quality of news, okay, and you say that that news editors influence the quality of news by helping select credible and authentic resources, okay, or authentic sources, then that's something you can test. Okay, so you can test if you know if uh, if stories that go through news editors, they have more credible resources, okay, or more authentic resources. If the resources are verified, then you can say, all right, so for that one you have two answers. So you can say yes, maybe they do, or no, maybe they don't. So you really don't know, in what way. So then the question becomes testable. Okay. Then the next thing, and I think this one is very important, is that there should not be any personal value judgment. Okay, so in empirical, in observation-based quantitative research, when you are forming questions, so if you have questions like, should graphic be used with television news stories? So there is a value judgment where you are saying should, okay, or should Bollywood represent more minority groups in this movie, in its movies? Now, again, that is a quality judgment, so that's a value judgment. So you are saying that, yes, it should do it, so some kind of moral judgment, some kind of value judgment. So in empirical research, you are just saying, so you can say that, all right, Bollywood is representing more minority groups in its movies in 2020 compared to 2000. Okay, and that's, and there is no value judgment there. But here, when you are saying Bollywood should, that's a value judgment. Okay, so um, so that's something that you don't do in quantitative research, in empirical research. Okay, now then sometimes a question arises, what are research questions, what are hypotheses? Okay, research questions are questions mostly without any claim or any speculation about the answer. Hypotheses are statements proposing a specific answer, okay, based on argumentation, logic, and are tested to see if that answer is correct. Okay, now, so think about this. Let's say, so let's so when you are looking at, when you are developing hypotheses or research questions, okay, a lot of times, you are starting with the literature review. So you are looking at literature and you are saying that, all right, so based on the logic from previous literature, based on theory and everything, it seems that this relationship will happen. So for example, if you increase message credibility, then message effectiveness will increase. And you say, all right, so if credibility increases, message effectiveness will increase. Okay. And that would be, so you are saying, if this increases, then that will increase. And that's a direction. So you are making a claim. Okay. But if you don't see, a conclusive relationship, so you find studies where they found a relationship, and you also found studies where they couldn't find a relationship. And then you say, we really don't know what will happen, so we will probably ask a research question. So that would be like, what is the relationship between message credibility and message effectiveness? Okay, so that would, so here you are not saying that there is a relationship, there is an increasing or decreasing relationship. You are just saying, what's the, so you are asking a question. When you are making a claim or testing a claim, then it's a hypothesis. So a simpler example would be, let's say, in a household, a mother has, let's say, made some gulab jamuns, okay, and or rasagullas, so since it's So since we are speaking to in Bengal mostly, so let's say a mother gets a lot of rasgullas and puts it in the fridge. Okay, next morning she comes there and she has three kids. Okay, so three children. Next morning she comes there, she opens the fridge and all the rasgullas are gone. Okay, so she asks. So if she says, uh, "Who has eaten the rasgullas?" Okay, so that is a research question. Okay, but if she says, if she knows that one of her kids, has a habit of, likes rasgullas a lot, and has and other two don't, or two of them are really small, then she says that person A. So let's say the kid's name is Raju, and then she says, Raju has eaten the rasgullas. Okay, and then she goes and asks Raju. So basically tries to investigate to prove or to see if Raju has eaten the rasgullas or not. Now, if she finds that Raju has not eaten the rasgullas, then she goes to other possible explanations. Okay, and a lot of times making predictions or making logical assumptions, or logical arguments about what is happening or what will happen, and then testing them. That's the hypothesis testing process. Okay, so that's the hypothesis research question. Some examples. What are the design factors that may make online video lectures for undergraduate students more effective? Okay. So you are just asking, what are those factors? A hypothesis would be content from online video lecture using animation will be remembered better than the content from the lecture without animation. In this case, you are making a prediction, you are making a claim, and then you will test that claim. So you are saying that, if you use online video lecture with animation, then it will be remembered better than the lecture without animation. Now, this is proposing a specific strategy, a specific direction. Okay, so you are saying this is better than this. In the research question, you are saying, what is the relationship? You didn't know what will be better. Okay, so that's your research question hypothesis. Another example: how has the representation of women in Hindi commercial cinema changed between 1990 and 2010? Now, again, this is a research question. Research questions can be a bit broad. Okay, so you are just saying, how has representation of women changed? You don't know how it has changed. You are not proposing any solution. You are not proposing any direction. Okay, but a hypothesis for a similar question would be, so representation will be presented more specifically. Okay, change will be presented more specifically. Time will be presented more specifically. So a question would be, so you are looking at one kind of representation in this case. So you are saying the ratio of women characters working in managerial positions to all women characters will be higher for Hindi commercial cinema produced between 2001 and 2010 than between 1990 to 2000. Now, this is more specific. You have time that is being compared, presented very specifically. You have representation presented very specifically. So representation as manager, um, so that's your that's hypothesis, and it is testable. So you can have yes or no answers. You might find that yes, there is difference, or there is no difference. Okay. Now, so those were, some ideas about variables, problem statements, research questions, and hypotheses, which are the building blocks for any research inquiry, okay, any quantitative or empirical research inquiry. Now, let's think about what kind of questions do media scholars ask. And this is very important, because most of the times that's where we are starting. You are working on a thesis, you are working on a dissertation, and you are like, I have seen people spending months and months. For someone like me, it took me 2 years to find my research topic for my dissertation. I just couldn't find a topic. Okay? For my master's, it took me around 6 to 8 months. Okay, So it was really hard for me to find a topic. Okay? So how do you find a topic? Okay? How do you find a good topic? Uh, let's see about what all can you ask, or what all kind of questions you ask. So Laswell's model of media, it's a very simple model, um, but it kind of helps us figure things out. Who says what, in what channel, to whom, with what effect. Okay, so you can ask question about who. Okay, so questions about producers, question about media organizations, so questions, a lot of questions like political ownership, or questions like is New York Times more biased than Times of India, things like that. So questions about news organizations. Who says what? So what is the nature of content? Okay. So what is the nature of content? So for example, did Times of India cover give more prominence to Ria Chakraborty than COVID-19 during last 2 months? So these are the questions about content. Okay, or does newspaper A gives more prominent coverage to prime minister's speeches than newspaper B? So these are questions about content. So what media is saying, or what media is presenting. Okay, um, or questions like questions of representation. So for example, are women leaders represented differently in media, let's say Hindi media than English media, or Bengali, or let's say does Anand Bazar Patrika represents women leaders differently than Times of India? So again, this is a message question. Says what? Okay. So then, in what channel? Does channel become important? So you might say, all right, so so for example, media comes to us through various channels. Okay, so there might be television, there might be online, there might be multimedia content, there might be print content. And a lot of times you say, maybe channel has something to do. So you say, when for example, you can compare if prime minister's speeches that are heard through that people watch through television are remembered better compared to when people listen to the same speech on radio. Or let's say you compare the coverage of same content online and in print newspaper. So you say, Anand Bazar Patrika presents election news differently on their website compared to their print newspaper. Okay, so these are channel questions. Okay, to whom? Now, to whom? Questions about audience. Who are the audience? How they process information. So questions like, do audience like some kind of content better than other kind of content? Do audience find something more effective than other kind of things? So those kind of things. What is the nature of audience? Then how do they process information? When do they process information? So all the questions about audience, they get into home, and with what effect. And this becomes your effectiveness question. Okay, do they find it credible? Do they find it effective? And remember, different links can merge at different times. Okay, now again, please remember, my example was mostly related to news media, but this could be anything, because media is not just news. Media is entertainment. Media is also public service or public health announcements. So when you are looking at, let's say announcements or campaigns, health campaigns for polio immunization. Okay, or campaigns about how to handle lockdown. That is also media. When Prime Minister gives a message, that is also media. When a political leader uses Twitter or any kind of social media, that is also media. So it's not necessarily news media. Cinema is also media. Okay, so movies, TV shows. So it's a very wide, it's a very wide area. Okay, now in this case, this interaction is also media. If your teacher or your professor or is communicating to you through media, any kind of media, that's mediated communication. Okay, so this lecture is a media message in a way. Okay, social media, all those. So it's a very wide range. Okay? But in most cases, you can kind of break your process in these steps to figure out a research topic. Okay? Now, if you think about all the questions that we can ask about media, where would we look for answers? Okay, so in the media environments, how would you get data? Because if you're looking at quantitative research, if you're looking at empirical research, then you are going to need data. Where do you collect your data from? So think about it. What are different ways you can collect your data? What is there in the media environment? Two primary sources. And so two sources of primary data where you can directly collect data. One is you look at the content. So if you're saying that this newspaper is biased or it covers this kind of content, then you look at the content, and analyze the content. Or you get information from people. So content and people. Okay, can you think of, if you're looking at primary sources, okay, when you're looking at places where you can collect data directly from, can you think of any other sources where you can collect data from, which are neither content nor people? It's not possible. So two things, two sources, content and people. So think about this. Okay. So there's this question: how are female chief ministers represented in national English language media? Are these representations different from the way male chief ministers are represented? Okay, so for example, you are saying, let's say you are saying that yes, the mainstream media or national English language media covers female chief ministers or stories related to female chief ministers different than male chief ministers. Okay, so for example, let's say if there is a story, election story about the chief minister of West Bengal, Mamata Banerjee, or if you are going historically, so if you are covering Mamata Banerjee, Mayawati, Jayalalitha, and there have been many other female chief ministers. If you are covering Rabri Devi, if you are covering these Sheila Dikshit, if you are covering these stories, if you are covering stories about these politicians, then the stories are covered differently. Different areas, media focuses on different areas. They talk about different things compared to when you are covering males, male politicians. So, for example, when in the past have Anand Bajar Patrika, let's say, covered stories about Jyoti Basu differently than stories about Mamata Banerjee. So things like that. Okay, and so when you are asking this question, what is the easiest way to get data for it? Now this is a content-based question. This is a representation-based question. Okay, so yes, you can interview people and ask them, are males covered differently than females, and you would get their perceptions. Okay, but But this is a question about content, that media content has different patterns of representation. Okay? So the best way to answer this question would be to look at the content, and analyze the content. Okay. Now, how about this? So, if you come to questions like this, how do grammatical spelling errors in WhatsApp messages in Hindi influence the credibility of these messages? So, for example, think about this. If you are getting a message where they are saying that, that this is a solution for that the cure for COVID-19 has been found in India, and if you mix, and this is the cure. Okay, but you find that there are many spelling errors in that message. Okay, are you more likely to believe that message if on WhatsApp compared to when there were no, or there had there not been any spelling errors? Okay, now in this case, how would you, where will you get your data from? Now you are looking at credibility. So what is credibility? It's a perception, okay? Perception among audience. So when you look at it, you cannot judge credibility, okay? So you can say, it's, yes, there are more factors that influence credibility, or there are less factors that may influence credibility. But to actually measure perceptions of credibility, you would have to ask people, did you actually find it credible? So for this, your answer will come from people. So probably survey research or experimental research methods. Okay. Now, what about this one? Are political speeches delivered through hologram technology as effective as those delivered by leaders in person? Okay. Now, hologram technology is something that that was used in previous elections, and it is something that I think is going to be used pretty frequently in future. So then you are asking, all right, so so was it as effective as in-person lectures? Okay, when hologram technology was used? Okay, then again, where will you get this data from? Probably from people. Okay, because it's effectiveness data. Okay, what is relationship between people's interest in politics, their ability to identify fake news about politics? Okay, so so where will you get this data from? The data to answer this question from people again. Okay, are older people less capable to identify fake news than younger people? How do you get this data? You will ask older people, you will ask younger people, different methods, survey, maybe you bring them to a lab, experiment, and that's how you know. Okay, so again, people. Okay, now how about this one? These two questions. The US North Korea summit in 2018 was covered more optimistically in mainstream South Korean print media than in the mainstream US print media. Okay, so in this case, you are looking at coverage. Okay, so you study coverage. Or second question, which frames are used prominently when US broadcast media covers Football World Cup? Is the application of frames in US different from the frames used in South American broadcast media? Okay, so it's a media framing question. Again, it's related to the content. Okay, so you look at the content. Okay. So a lot of questions like this. For example, let's look at the second question. How are the minorities represented in Bollywood movies? Does the proportion of minority representations match the demographic makeup of Indian population? Now, again, in this case, you will have to look at Bollywood movies. Okay, so again, the content. Okay, how do the Tamil, the Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, and Bengali movie industries compare in terms of depiction of violence? Okay, now people might think that violence is different in different in different regions, how it is depicted in movies. Okay, how is it done? Okay, again, in this case, you are looking at content mostly. You know, so then you have a range of questions. Okay, so for example, there is a question in Hindi language mixed gender TV newscast where you have one female and one male anchors. Women anchors present more human interest news stories than male anchors. Male anchors, on the other hand, present more hard news stories than women. Okay, so this is a hypothesis, okay, where you are saying that when when both men or women are there, women do more stories on entertainment or or things like what a particular star is doing, or things about you know um, about what is happening in the festivals, how people celebrated festivals, what is the new gadget that has come into the market, all those kind of things, where men are more likely to do the hard news stories about crime, stories about economy, and all those kind of things. Okay, so again, where do you look for answers to these? You look at the content. Okay, so let's say you decide that you want to look at the content, okay, and you want to conduct a content analysis, a quantitative content analysis. Okay, so you come up with a research question hypothesis. Okay, then you define population. Select a sample, define coding units, construct categories, and develop a coding manual, train coders and test reliability, code sample content, and generate data, and then analyze and interpret data. Okay. So, what do you mean by defining population? Okay. So, remember, if you are asking, so for example, if you look at the second question, in Hindi language mixed gender TV newscast, women anchors present more human interest news stories than male anchors. But then, which women anchors, or what time, what kind of TV newscast, which channels? So all those things become very important. So you have to kind of figure out the duration. So you say, all right, so I'm interested in knowing about these 10 years. Okay, nature of media. I'm interested in knowing about cable television news. Okay, or national news. So it's, let's say, uh, on Doordarshan. Nature of content. Okay, so again, let's say prime time news. The nighttime news. Okay, then so for example, if you're asking questions like English language television news, news post financial reforms. So after financial reforms in 1991, English language television news became more sensational. Okay, and then I say, all right, so what do I want to compare? So I say, all right, so before it was DD Metro and Doordarshan, so DD National and Doordarshan. So we will compare them before and after. Okay, but we will compare them only for 10 years. So 1981 to 1992, so one group, and 1991 to 2000. Okay, so that is your population. Two channels, this duration, nighttime news. Okay, so that becomes your population. Now, the thing is, and the same you can do in other cases. Now, the thing is that you have, like, if you are looking at these 20 years, okay, and how many days are there? So if you're looking at nighttime, nighttime news, and there are 365 days, so you are looking at 3,650 stories for 10 years. Okay, so more than 7,000 stories, more than 7,000 news bulletins. Okay, in that particular case, and you don't have that much time or that much resources, especially for for media students. If you're a student, it will take so much time, and and you probably do not have that much time, and it will also take a lot of money. Like, it will take a lot of money to a lot of time to archive all this content, to find all this content, then for someone to watch it and then analyze it. Okay. So that's not possible. So it's 7,200, 7,000, around 7,500. So that's not possible. But if we do it right, if we select a sample so that we have to, let's say, look at just 500 news bulletins between 1980 to 90, and 99, and 500 between 91 to 2000. So if we do a good sample, then we just have to study, or we just have to analyze these 1,000 stories, and that will tell us what is happening in all those 7,000 stories. So that reduced our work quite significantly, and it made it possible for someone to conduct that study. Okay. So for that, sampling becomes a very useful technique, where you select things that you want to code or that you want to study in a systematic manner. Okay, so in a rule-based manner, let's not use word systematic, in a rule-based manner, so that studying them might give you a sense of what is happening among the population. Okay, so that's what sampling is. So for example, let's say I want to see how people in let's say the people in Vivekanand College, how students in Vivekanand College feel about online classes. Okay, and there are thousands of students. Okay, so I cannot access all of them, but then I say that yes, there are thousands of students, but let me just sample 20% of them and get online surveys to them, and I get data, and from that data it will give me, if I do my survey right, in the right manner, or if I sample things in right manner, I may be able to say that the findings represent the findings of represent the whole student body at Vivekanand College. So what kind of sampling might be problematic? So let's say I look at and I don't, I'm just guessing a lot of things. So let's say there are different departments, okay, in Vivekanand College, but I go to just one department and I say, I'm in the media, so I'll just ask these 500 students. I'll just send this questionnaire to all these 500 students, and I'll see what. Now that might not be representative, because there might be other colleges where things are happening differently, or maybe if there are, engineering colleges, students may have different perspectives about online teaching, or courses where you have a lot of where you need in-person interactions. Their students might be facing those issues. Okay, so sampling right is very important. Okay? So there are different sampling methods: random sampling, systematic random sampling, stratification, multi-stage sampling. But the example we talked about selecting people. How does it apply to content? We are talking about content analysis. Okay? So the way it works with people, the same way it works with content. So there may be different kind of content, there may be a range of content, different kind of stories, and so on. So for example, if you look at the news bulletin example, so where you are saying we are going to sample, let's say, 500 stories from Doordarshan news stories between 1980 to 90, then you want to make sure that then you get a sense that weekend stories are different stories. The news bulletins that are close to festival seasons, they cover different kind of content. News bulletins that are closer to during election times may cover different kind of content. So then you might want to make sure that the 500 stories you study, they have all kind of situations represented. So again, sampling becomes very important in content analysis. It's just that you sample content instead of people. Then defining coding unit. What will you code? The smallest unit that will be coded: a story, a sentence, a paragraph, and add a character. So that is something that you decide. You construct categories and develop a coding manual. Okay. All right. So you operationalize different levels of variables. So, for example, uh, let's say you are looking at a story, you are conducting a study, and you say that we want to see if Anand Bajar Patrika, we want to look at all the stories where uh, Prime Minister Modi, that about Prime Minister Modi in last 2 years, and we want to see if Anand Bajar Patrika covered Prime Minister Modi more negatively, or if Anand Bajar Patrika's coverage was more negative than mainstream media, like let's say Times of India. Okay. And then you say, all right, so then we will look at each story. So we'll find all the stories in 1 year about Prime Minister Modi. You use any database, you use Google search, LexisNexis, whatever you do, you get all these stories. And then you select your sample. Okay. But then for each your sample, you have to, you have to code it. Okay. And so you look at a story and you say, all right, so this was a negative coverage, you know, or this story was positive coverage. Okay. So you look at all the stories, and let's say New York Times of India has 100 stories, and Anand Bajar Patrika has 80 stories, and you find that in 80 stories, 60 stories, or 40 stories used a negative tone, whereas in Times of India, 20 stories used a negative tone. And then you would be able to say that Anand Bajar Patrika, 50% of times they use a negative framing or a negative tone, compared to Times of India, which use a negative tone only 20% of time. Okay, so that's what is happening. So for that, you have to look at each story and give it, and to assign it a code value. Okay, so let's say you have three code values: positive, negative, and neutral, and you make rules. You say, if I look at a story and if it has these things, then we will say, or if it has these characteristics, then we will say that it's a positive story. If we look at a story, it has these characteristics, then we'll say it's a neutral story. If we look at a story and it has these characteristics, we say that it is a negative story. Okay, then you look at all the stories and assign them one of these values. Okay, so you say, all right, so if it's negative, we will give it a number, 1. If it's neutral, 2. If it's positive, 3. Okay, so then you are looking at each story and you'll think, all right, this is a 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 1. If it's negative, if it's neutral, if it's positive. Okay, and when you have coded all the stories, then you have all these numbers. Okay, and then you can look at their frequencies, analyze those numbers. Okay, but you have to make sure that different categories. So in this case, the categories were positive, negative, neutral. Okay, they are mutually exclusive. Okay, so if a story is coded as positive, so if you put 3 on a story, it cannot at the same time be coded as negative or neutral. Okay, so they are mutually exclusive. They are exhaustive. There is no other category. So all stories are either positive, negative, or neutral. Now, the third thing, and that is very important, is that the criterion, that your rules for saying that a story is positive or negative or neutral, have to be defined in advance. Okay. Now, so you say, all right, so if this happens, that will say it's negative. If this happens, then we'll say this is positive. Now, once that happens, so once you have made your categories, once you have made your rule book, so you have to develop a written rule book. Okay, you call it a coding manual. Okay, then you have to make sure that it's reliable. Okay, now reliability is it's the key factor in a content analysis. Okay? So before you you go and start looking at the stories and saying that this is a positive story, this is a negative, this is a neutral story, you have to make sure that that your rules are being applied consistently. So think about it. Let's say you take two people and they look at the same story, and one person says this story is positive, other person says this story is negative. Then that's a problem. Okay, Because what you are doing in content analysis, you are converting subjectivity into numbers. So this is subjective content. Okay. And and negativity, or what is negative or what is positive, may be subjective. What is biased, what is not biased, that may also be subjective. So how do you address it? Okay. So you want to make sure that people are using your rules the right way. So then you make your rules, you take two people, two coders. Okay. And then these two coders take a number of stories and code them independently. So one coder is giving, looking at these stories. So let's say you want to do 500 stories. So you take 75 stories, and one coder looks at all the stories and values, and gives them codes. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 3. Okay. Then the second coder also codes those stories, the same stories. Okay. And then you compare if they are coding, the stories the same way. If they understood the rules, that you made for giving values to stories, then they should agree. Then they should give same values to the stories. Okay. Now, remember, this is a subjective process. So it's very hard in many cases for them to agree 100%. But you say, we will consider it to be fine if they agree more than 80% of time, or more than 75% of times. And there are, rules in literature in that. So before you actually start generating data, you make sure that, that people who are going to look at the content and generate data, they are doing it right, and they are using it, they are using the principles or the rules that you made in the right manner. So, and this is what we call reliability testing. The instrument becomes reliable when different coders code the content and produce the same result. The judgment of similarity can be done using the percentage agreement method. A small sample is coded by both the coders, and the percentage of coding units on which their codes are the same is calculated. Okay. So let's say people, both coders coded 75 stories each, and their evaluations agreed on 60 stories. Okay. So then you look at, what is 60? Well, so 60 upon 75. So I'm calculating, let's say the percentage. Okay. So it's 80%. Okay. So you said, all right, so coders agreed 80% of time. So I think this is acceptable. Let's go ahead with it. So after that happens, then your coders, then you can divide stories among your coders, or even one coder can code all 500 stories. Okay. Or all 1,000 stories actually. Okay. And then you analyze that data and come to your results. Okay. So that's content analysis in nutshell. Okay. So basically, content analysis, you are looking at subjective content, you are trying to convert it in numbers. When you are doing qualitative content analysis, there is no requirement to convert it in numbers. Okay. And that's what confuses people a lot of times, because content analysis is often shown in both categories. Okay. So I will stop here, and I will stop sharing my screen. And I think I have around 10 to 15 minutes left. During that time, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. Yes, so I'm stopping to share my screen, and yes, so I'm open to questions. Please feel free to let me know if you have any questions, if you want to ask them.
So,
Yes.
like, I don't find any questions there in the chat box. So shall we take questions at the end of the session after Professor Bhattacharya completes her
Yeah.
lecture?
Yes, sure.
Huh? Okay, sir. Will that be fine? Yes,
Mhm.
yes. Is there. So we'll move on to the next session for today. Uh, we have got our honorable speaker, Dr. Mausumi Bhattacharyya. Madam, she is currently working as Associate Professor in Journalism and Mass Communication in Vishwa Bharati University in India. Dr. Bhattacharya is into university teaching and research in India for the last 2 decades. She is attached with the Center for the Culture and Governance, Jamia Millia Islamia University, New Delhi, as ICSSR postdoctoral fellow from 2019 to 2017 to 2019. She has been selected as a scholar by the US government from India for the coveted Studies in US Institute in Journalism and Media program in 2016. She has also received the prestigious postdoctoral research grant by the International Association of Women in Radio and Television, Focus, Norway in 2015. Madam has several more accolades to her credit. She was also selected to take part as an expert in the National Mission on Education through ICT by the Ministry of Human Resource Development, Government of India, to coordinate the Gender, Media and Society section of Media and Communication Studies of the EPG Pathshala course by the Government of India. She has been nominated from India in the scientific committee of the Symposium on Asia-US Partnership Opportunities organized by Kennesaw State University, US, Atlanta in 2013. Madam has got several research articles in Impact Factor journals to her credit, along with 3 edited books. And she is also one of the pioneering members of the Young Leaders think tank of Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, uh, Germany. With this, without making no further delays, I would request Dr. Bhattacharya to begin her lecture. Ma'am, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Akash, for your generous, kind introduction. Actually, I was mesmerized with Dr. Jatin Srivastava's presentation.
Yes.
Very insightful, and the way actually he presented. So, little thing left for me actually to
Yes,
discuss. So,
yes,
anyway,
everything, the whole quantitative approach he,
yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
in nutshell,
Yeah,
yeah,
practical examples and all. It's
it was
absolutely.
really very enriching.
Yeah, and Dr. Srivastava is one of the researchers and like teachers in mass communication research. I mean, in our time, so I also learn a lot from him. Thank you so much, and thank you to your college, Thakur Pukur Vivekananda College principal sir and you for inviting me here. So, and my presentation will be on qualitative research in communication, its application and significance. So, maybe I will try to add value to something which Dr. Jatin said. So, I want to present my screen right now. Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Uh,
yeah.
just check whether you can see my
Now,
screen.
uh,
Just
ma'am, the
let.
presentation is, yeah, off. Like your screen is being shared. Yeah, now the presentation is.
Is it coming?
Yes, ma'am.
Just a second. Just give me some time. Let me.
Yes, ma'am.
can you see my slide?
Yes, ma'am.
You can
Yeah.
see the slide, right?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely clear.
Okay. So my topic is qualitative research in communication, its application and significance. So, and I would like to start with the famous quote of Donald Thomas Campbell. As you all know, he is the eminent American social scientist who is noted for his work in methodology. He said, and I quote, all research ultimately has a qualitative grounding. Like so far, we have listened to the detail of mass communication research and the sampling techniques and the qualitative and quantitative like research methods and all. Dr. Jatin Srivastava has explained it explicitly. So I would like to throw some light on the qualitative research per se. So, within the domain of mass communication, the last couple of decades have witnessed consistent development and thriving of qualitative and interpretative research approaches. And like there are a lot of faculties also here. I can see that in the participants. So you all know that this trend has subsequently encouraged communication researchers to relook and re-examine the methodological approaches they have generally adopted while conducting studies related to communication. Though this does not imply quantitative research falling out of vogue in the context of communication research, it does indicate towards growing acceptance and application of qualitative research approaches. While a unanimous view about what constitute the foundational principles of qualitative approach in studies related to mass communication is yet to surface, an operational definition of the same has been put forward by experts. So, a few experts explained qualitative research as real life observation done over a consistent period of time, solely focusing on the phenomenon or subject under study. As such, qualitative research approach relies on close observation of subjects in their natural surrounding and performing mundane activities and tasks. These are recorded and descriptively presented by researchers conducting qualitative studies. Case study and observation of participants are therefore two commonly employed methods of qualitative researchers. So, given the growing prevalence of qualitative researcher in mass communication studies, I intend to present an overview of application of the approach, combining theoretical insights and examples. I will try to outline the progress qualitative application in communication studies have gained so far. So, to start with, I would like to show you few very specific differences which actually we can see the mass communication researchers between this qualitative and quantitative researchers. And if you can see the table in the slide properly, it encapsulates the primary divergences between qualitative and quantitative research approaches. Differences can be assessed in terms of general framework, adapted analytical objectives, manner of formatting of questions, kind of data collected, and also degree of flexibility involved in study design. In terms of the overall framework, qualitative research is undertaken when the objective of researcher is to explore a phenomenon, while quantitative research is suitable when the researcher is aiming to confirm or evaluate a hypothesis regarding a specific phenomenon. Dr. Srivastava has explained it explicitly. As such, in qualitative framework, researcher opts for research instruments which are flexible and uses a repetitive approach to elicit responses and categorize them for analysis. Whereas in quantitative research, however, more rigid research instruments are used and the repetitive style of gathering responses and categorization of them is avoided. Next comes qualitative research also witnesses application of semi-structured method of data collection, while in quantitative research, very structured approach to data collection are employed. In terms of analytical objectives, qualitative research caters to providing description of variations, relations, experiences of individuals and norms followed by any group. Quantitative research seeks to quantify variations, forecast, causal relations, and outline population characteristics as its analytical objectives. As such, qualitative research uses open-ended questions, while quantitative research uses closed-ended questions, as the former aims to gather textual information, while the latter seeks to gather numerical data. Though qualitative research design retains a degree of flexibility, quantitative research design is absolutely, quite rigid actually. This enables qualitative researchers to alter their questions according to responses provided by respondents or ask follow-up questions as may be applicable. In case of quantitative research, this does not occur and responses do not impact question formulation or sequencing. Now, I would like to discuss the approaches of qualitative research. Here you can see few points I have jotted down. So, prior to delving on the application of qualitative research in the domain of mass communication, I think it is pertinent to gather an overview of the different types of, approaches of research, qualitative. The points I have mentioned in the slide summarize the approaches and corresponding salient features. Let us take ethnography. So, what is ethnography actually? It has its roots in anthropology, which is absolutely very important, to know while studying communication. This ethnography enables descriptive study of culture and people. Its cultural parameters of commonalities are geography, religion, social, and shared experiences. Ethnography also involves extensive fieldwork and data is collected through formal and informal interviews. In ethnography, participant and non-participant observation is also employed for data collection. Data interpretation involves phenomenological approach, which is interpretation from point of view of participants. Case study research is a part of this type and can involve studying the case of an individual or of an event which has involvement of several people. Now, let me explain the grounded theory, this approach of qualitative research. Principal objective of this grounded theory is development of a new theory post-collection and interpretation of data about a phenomenon. These two follows the phenomenological approach and interprets data from perspective of participants. However, it transcends phenomenology as the outcome of analysis is used to develop new theories. Theory about grief process is a common example of grounded theory. Interviews and observations are most employed data collection techniques in this theory. Review of existing literature and documentary evidences are also used in grounded theory approach. Next comes interpretative phenomenological analysis, which is very interesting. Phenomenological and interpretative are the two components of this approach. The former aids researcher in understanding how participants interpret individual experiences. The latter acknowledges researcher also interpreting analysis of respondents. As such, this type of qualitative research accepts the insider view. This approach also accepts negotiation happening between researcher and researched, leading to formation of the insider view. Information is coded by researchers from which emergent themes evolve. These are used to produce more holistic themes. Fourth one is discourse analysis. Herein, researchers focus on organization of discourses with the objective of being persuasive or presenting a specific view. Discourses are analyzed to extract themes about the words commonly used and how they are used. The former is known as linguistic repertory and the latter rhetorical strategies. Function of discourse and its content are also relevant for researchers. Then comes conversation analysis. This approach helps in studying social organization of conversation and how the organization is formed. It analyzes how social conversations are structured and organized. Aspects like taking turns to speak, recurrence of pauses, duration of pauses are also studied in this approach. Last but not the least, the content analysis, about which we have also listened so far from Dr. Srivastava, and he has lightly pointed out, frequency of occurrence of a word, sentence of theme is considered by researchers. Specialized rules of coding are employed for newspaper articles and responses to open-ended questions. This approach is pertinent. You have already you have come to know about a lot of examples from Dr. Srivastava in this regard. Now, I would like to brief on understanding communication research. So in their book, The Media in Your Life, An Introduction to Mass Communication, Joe Focus and Stephen Lacey describe research in mass communication as a systematic exploration of content presented by media. Factors which influences information being shared and presented and manner of media operation. How is media utilized and why and how is media information and institution impacting citizens and society? Though intent of conducting mass communication research varies as per basic objective of specific researchers, it being a systematic study building on information made available by media remains the core factors. Notwithstanding it being a scientific examination process, often taking the form of a detailed academic pursuit, it is regarded as an art. In this sense, mass communication research implies the art of employing scientific research tools to deciphering media communication, its dynamics and fallout on society. Subjects pertaining to different media forms like radio, newspaper, television, public relations, advertising, listener or radio reactions, and traditional communication behavior are accessed as per outlined scientific tools and approaches in mass communication research. This facilitates understanding of the relation between individuals and society and how communication process can be improved and applied to strengthen and better such relation. As a wing of research, studies in mass communication are of relatively recent origin. Owing inception to early 20th century, it generated debates about the value of mass media itself on general receivers. Throughout the decades of 1920 and 1930, scholars argued about mass media having significant influence on public and therefore requiring detailed exploration. However, in the following decades, till 1960s, US researchers propagated about limited effect of mass media on recipients. Such exchanges did not deter communication researchers who attempted identifying aspects which regulated content published by media. By 1970s, influences of factors on determination of information shared by media gathered traction and number of studies swelled. Leading scholars like Charles Cooley, Robert Park, and John Dewey worked on topics which emphasize the role of communication in fostering a sense of belongingness and community in the post-industrialized scenario. A second group of researchers of the view that media is not strong enough to alter society focused their studies on media economics. Applying theoretical frameworks, they intended to understand how the finance of media works and in turn controls media functioning. Hence, for them, professional dimensions of media and its members was of no major importance. Such developments have immensely contributed towards enriching the field of mass communication research, bringing in new perspectives and dimensions to studies conducted. Volume of research undertaken over the years underlines that while mass media may not necessarily be imposing the kind of influence that was envisaged by a section of scholars, practitioners, and researchers, it is also not as incompetent as has been made out to be by the opposing group. In real life, certain information or news items do exert significant impact on receivers, with the degree of such impact being functional to several other aspects. Researchers are consistently striving to identify factors and assess how they affect impact levels. Increasing commercialization and corporatization of media establishments and contributions of media in ensuring maintenance of established structures of power are key findings of research efforts in recent times. At this juncture, I would like to highlight few things about the history of qualitative research in communication. I think this is very important to know. Barger and Barger had noted around closing years of the 19th century and early years of the 20th century, issue of social importance has gained prominence among academic researchers. Nearly all studies conducted during this period followed the qualitative research approach, and this is evident from works of Weber, Simmel, Durkheim, and others. With emerging academic fields offering specialization to students and scholars and establishment of different subject-specific departments, qualitative approach became popular among researchers. Sante opines that works of several researchers contributed immensely in determining how field studies were to be optimally undertaken and completed in the field of social science research. Malinowski popularized the method of observation of participants in real-life settings, suggesting it would aid researchers in understanding participants' views and perspectives, relation with life and surroundings they share, and also their perception of the world. Even though it was subsequently learned that Malinowski himself had difficulty in implementing the direct observation approach in practice, yet he remains one of the first researchers to have supported its utilization. In the meantime, University of Chicago also contributed to the evolution of qualitative research, specifically in the discipline of sociology. W.Y. Thomas, Robert Park, and Ernest Burgess were leading forces in this regard, undertaking qualitative exploration in studying divergent aspects of urban lifestyle. Subsequently, studies started focusing on community life and living, which came to be known urban ethnography and emerged as another method of qualitative research. Specific focus on media-oriented studies was initiated by Robert Park, probably due to his journalistic background. He remained committed to the notion of media being a vital social institution and authored the piece, The Natural History of Newspaper. Though this piece did not contain empirical findings and its presentation, it did underline the concern of the researcher viewing newspapers in relation to cities and social communities. He had also examined the role and contribution of newspapers among immigrants. Having explored the impact among European immigrants, states Robert Park as frequently imploring communication and social science researchers to behave like journalists in recording everything they saw and heard, which then can all be analyzed while deducting conclusions. He thus stressed on precise noting of facts and its analysis rather than relying on discernment. Park had also advised his students to get their details conducting primary research, laying emphasis on observation and simultaneous recording of findings. This method gained popularity within Chicago University and came to be known as participant observation, a vital constituent of qualitative research approach. One of the earliest communication-oriented studies undertaken by Chicago University was to assess how child viewers were impacted by films. This study was undertaken towards the end of decade of 1920s by Herbert Blumer and Philip Hauser and was a Motion Picture Research Council commissioned project. Primary objective of researchers was to explore the existence or absence of any correlation between films and delinquency. In addition to these, a couple of monographs were also produced by Chicago University researchers under the aegis of the Payne Fund studies. In summarization, both these projects emphasized on comprehending the consequences of attitudes or perceptions on objective factors, which for these studies were films. Both research works were exploratory in nature and relied heavily on interviews and case studies, which too are vital data collection methods of qualitative research. Limited application of participant observation was noted for both these studies. During the 1970s, a concerted effort by researchers for adoption of qualitative research approaches in communication came to fore. One of the foremost critics of quantitative methods in communication research was Gitlin, who held survey method as having minimal effect on communication and therefore relevant data generation. Though Gitlin did not vociferously advocate adoption of qualitative approaches, he deftly highlighted the shortcomings of quantitative methodologies in communication and social science research. Before the end of the decade, however, quantitative researchers were challenged by the qualitative school, with the latter aligning with the interpretative approach to research in communication and social sciences. Interpretivist scholars and researchers believe that precise understanding of reality, be it socially constructed or given, can be gathered through language, consciousness, and shared meanings, all of which are forms of social constructions. As such, the interpretative approach stresses on utilization of qualitative analysis of a situation or problem, as such, provides greater insights into the phenomenon being studied rather than quantitative analysis does. In this context, Tesh had noted about the presence of different interpretative research options which are overlapping in theory and method. Symbolic interactionism, ethnomethodology, and ethnography are three important methodological avenues which are frequently utilized by qualitative researchers. So before getting into this methodologies, I would like to discuss four theories quickly, which are absolutely important while studying qualitative research. The first one is the hypodynamic nebula theory, is a communication method underlining direct recept and wholesome acceptance of a message by the receiver of the communication. Coming to fore during the 1930s, the hypodermic theory borrows from the behavioral school. For a considerable length of time, it was thought to be an obsolete model. This mass customization projected its importance and triggered its revival. Hypodermic theory highlights the direct effect communication via mass media channels can have on the receiver, an aspect effectively utilized by propaganda machinery of the Nazi party at that point of time. Since this theory assumes the messages to be a bullet fired from the gun of mass communication channels directly into the intellect of the receiver, it is also known as the magic bullet theory. Taking the above a step further, cultivation theory explores the impact of mass communication through television and viewers. This socio-cultural theory examines the effect television communication has on shaping perceptions, values, beliefs, and attitudes of viewers about the world around them. Adoption of the subtle messages of communication via television by viewer is a basic hypothesis of this model. Hence, the message being communicated becomes vital due to its influence on viewer notion and perceptions. If messages communicated via television closely reflected reality, then viewer perception would have been accordingly aligned. But content analysis of shows suggests television programs being divergent from existing reality. Such anomaly gives birth to erroneous notions and perceptions among viewers, which subsequently undermines their interaction with others and society in general. The audience reception theory and its constituent encoding and decoding model was proposed by Stuart Hall, countering existing perceptions about how communication messages were generated, circulated, and interpreted by the audience. Hall suggested researchers need to consider the political and social context within which messages are produced and its subsequent interpretation. The former is known as encoding and the latter decoding. He discouraged researchers from assuming patterns in which messages are encoded and decoded and emphasized on conducting suitable research to analyze and evaluate the prevalent social and political context within which encoding and decoding happens. Contrary to other standings which diluted the role of audience in the decoding process, Hall opined that audience is vital during the decoding phase because of their reliance on existing social context which can give the encoded message a different interpretation that intended by the encoder. Hence, researchers' focus on analysis was repeatedly stressed by him. Developments in understanding of this discussed theories relied on communication research, and experts suggested that their proper interpretation and comprehension also relies on suitable and relevant research. This, in a way, underlines the vitality of communication research and the criticality of a suitable approach in undertaking such exercises. So actually these theories were important. I discussed this because to understand the interpretivist methodologies also. Here I'm coming again this interpretivist methodologies which I discussed just before the theories. So now I would like to throw a bit light on these methodologies, like evolving from concepts introduced by Mead in mind, self and society, and later from theoretical concepts of Bloomer. Symbolic interactionism assumes that action of people is guided by misinterpretations and meanings they personally attach to situations and objects. In other words, the way people interpret a situation or object formulates their reaction to such situation or object. Bloomer further added that when people interact with others, they start deriving meaning of situations and objects, and this derived meaning further undergoes transformation as the process of interpretation through interaction continues. Lincoln and Guber stress that qualitative researchers do not intervene in developed interpretations, thereby recording the naturalistic perspective during their studies. Observation of participants in their natural surroundings ensures non-intervention by researchers, thus protecting the naturalistic perspective. It is for this reason, in works of symbolic interactionism, naturalistic perspectives become pronounced. Now, ethnomethodology. This is another form of interpretative research. It can be explained as the process through which people identify rules which aids them in understanding the world around. Garfinkel, who held ethnomethodology as a practical way to sociological analysis, is generally credited with coinage of the term, development of its core concepts, and being a source of motivation of qualitative researchers employing this route. Mullet and Lester adopted this technique for their examination of news as purposive behavior, and by Tushman for investigation and analysis of news organizations. Though there is no earmarked approach associated with this form of interpretivist works, in-depth interviews and participant observation are the two commonly employed data collection techniques. The third approach of ethnography owes its evolution to anthropology, and therefore both are thought to be identical till a period of time. In present times, ethnography has found application in fields other than anthropology, and even within this domain, several ethnographical applications have evolved over time. Notwithstanding the different strains, three integral aspects of ethnography can, however, be identified. The first aspect is ethnographical research being relevant for all types of studies related to culture, which extends from arts to religion and culture visible in everyday life. The second aspect is the accepted need for longitudinal observation of participants, wherein the researcher becomes the primary channel of inquiry. And the third aspect is employment of different methods of data collection to counter-check information gathered from the observations. Holistic, semiotic, and behavioristic are the three forms of anthropological ethnography generally utilized by the researchers. For generating accurate results from ethnographical studies, scholars have highlighted the importance of establishment of productive relation and trust between researcher and group or society which is being examined. As such, scholars have recommended fieldwork duration of at least a year so that trusting relation transpires and recording of accurate data is made possible. A noteworthy communication and media study which employed all the above methods, all the discussed methods, was exploration of the social utility of television by Lull in 1980. Central objective of the study was to identify the pivotal role television plays in developing methods, employment of which enables families and social units to engage in normative interactions. Lull applied a combination of interview method and observation of participants, aiding them in identification of communication and interaction patterns that participants displayed in the natural setting of their homes. Following this attempt, several other researchers deployed the approach for their studies about mass communication. Now, before getting into some concrete example, I would like to discuss the constituents of mass media research. Beamer and Dominic, in their book Mass Media Research and Introduction, listed constructs and concepts, variables, measurement, and scale as principal constituents of mass media research. They explained concept as terminology which suggests an abstract concept arrived at through generalization of specifics and analysis of observations made. Put another way, concepts are broad concepts actually derived from information gathered by researchers. Within the perimeter of mass media research, effectiveness of advertising, length of message, usage of media, and readability were cited as conventional concepts. A beneficial advantage of concepts They allow researchers to assemble characteristics, people, and objects into understandable categories. This simplifies the entire process and aids researchers to deduce definitive conclusions. Secondly, those in know-how of the concepts find it easier to communicate or discuss about them with others. Utilizing concepts, researchers are able to develop summaries from their observations, which are then communicated to relevant others. Use of concepts eases both communication and comprehension. It has been found use of agenda setting concept in regards to audience and activities of the media rendered it easier for audience to understand the communication. Beamer and Dominic remind that for concepts to be effective, it must be understood by the communicator and the receiver. When concept has particular characteristics, it is considered a construct. First, construct is an accumulation of concept, which implies it being an idea which can be fragmented into smaller abstract concepts. Secondly, constructs are not directly observable since it contains the element of abstraction. And third, constructs are study specific. This means that relevance of construct is limited to the particular study it has been developed for. An example of a construct is the involvement of viewers with advertisement campaigns. Involvement is regarded a construct as it cannot be observed directly and remains limited to the domain of advertisement. Additionally, it is summation of concepts like attention, arousal, and interest. Within research in mass communication, authoritarianism is also considered to be a construct. It signifies a kind of personality which is not overtly visible but can be detected through use of questionnaire of similar research instrument. Also, authoritarianism as a construct is said to consist of 9 concepts including submission, cynicism, conventionalism, superstition, and the likes. The empirical manifestation of constructs is variables. They are the bridge between the empirical and theoretical domains. As such, variables represent the phenomena or attributes which is measured or analyzed through any research undertaking. In a study, for example, pertaining to viewer satisfaction with the pay-per-view system, the satisfaction level is the considered variable being put to test. Since the level of satisfaction can be different, it is apparent that variables can have different values. Often, various variables are examined by researchers in a single study to decipher the presence or absence of potential relation between them. Variables which are important for defining or lending prominence to constructs are known as marked variables. Dependent variables are those variables which the researcher aims to throw more light on through their studies. Values of dependent variables are regulated by another set of variables known as independent variables. In any study, variables which remain unaffected by any situation or happening or circumstances are independent variables. Variables which get impacted by alterations in values of these independent variables are known as dependent variables. Selection of variables is vital for any study, and hence researchers should judiciously identify the set of dependent and independent variables which will give credible and best results. Scale is another crucial element of research and is considered a core element of communication research projects. It implies the composite value of any variable and therefore determines the outcome of any research exercise. Though mainly associated with quantitative research, its contribution in mass communication research cannot be denied. Hence, it can be said that for qualitative mass communication research, care should be taken by researchers to clearly understand and define associated concepts, constructs, dependent and independent variables. Information gathering and the best way to do it will emerge from these aspects, following which researchers will be able to generate credible and valid results. I would like to give few examples now. Actually, there are several qualitative research studies in the domain of mass communication, review of which brings out the diverse approaches adopted by researchers. Jim Tyler chose participant observation and qualitative interview approaches for a study titled Media Clubs, Social Class and Shared Interpretations of Media Texts. In addition of the data collection methods, Tyler also considered available notes on the subject and pieces from a reflective journal to gather an entire gamut of information. These were then subjected to critical discourse analysis to identify conversational practices prevalent across 8 media clubs. For his study titled Communicating Health as an Impossibility, Sex Work, HIV/AIDS, and the Dawns of Hope, Amber Basu adopted ethnographic observation and interview, using unstructured open-ended questionnaire to gather information about the manner in which marginalized sex workers communicate about contradictions of health in their daily lives. The culture-centric approach of the researcher poignantly brought out the journey of sex workers between hope and hopelessness as far as health is concerned. Another interesting application of qualitative research in mass communication was undertaken by Franz et al. Using information gathered from social media platform Facebook. Researchers' choice of the route was influenced by widening user base of Facebook, generating exponential volumes of data. Harnessing such quantum would offer in-depth insights into diverse aspects, attracted the research group. The researchers opined that though users mostly author posts or comment on posts of others, the wealth of information available presented a feasible proposition. Yet, the group points out that utilization of Facebook data requires adapting traditional qualitative methods to the uniqueness of the medium and information generated. Hence, conducting content analysis presents its share of challenges. Solution is completed in the absence of guidelines on optimal use of available data. This gap was what the undertaken research aimed to fill. It envisaged identification of opportunities of qualitative research from Facebook data, the challenges it entails, and how this can be addressed. Researchers note that to find out how health research was being qualitatively conducted basis information accessed from the social media platform, review of 23 published research works published between 2011 to 2018, coupled with analytical experience, and enabled the researchers to highlight the in-use method. Basis findings, strategies were put forward together with 5 recommendations regarding collection, organization, and analysis of Facebook data. The study points out to active analysis, passive analysis, and research self-identification as 3 qualitative research methods related to social media studies. Active analysis implies direct interaction between research team members and social media users. Opening a page or forming a group and inviting users to join are practical options and has been implemented by Chiang et al. Passive analysis involves interpretation of trends detectable within conversations on the platform or through exchanges between members of different groups. Research self-identification implies recruitment of participants for qualitative research methods like focus group discussion, interviews conducted online, or surveys. Of the 23 published work analyzed by Franz et al., 18 were found to have adopted the passive analysis route, 5 had adopted for active analysis, and none chose research self-identification. Among practitioners of passive analysis, number of posts examined ranged from 25 to 500. Number of comments analyzed ranged from 233 to 15,972, while group or pages considered ranged from 1 to 840. The heavy skew towards passive analysis was underlined by the study, pointing out to the need for greater focus on active analysis and research self-identification. Advertising on Facebook, seeking participation from those interested in the research subject and exercise, initiation of conversation, and exchanges by setting up groups or launching a page and stimulating passive users to start participating and interacting were noted by Franz et al. As prospective points to note when undertaking qualitative research using Facebook or social media data. Pertinence of qualitative research accentuates during a pandemic situation. So we are actually going through a trying time, and I think I should also give at least one example from this situation. Like this COVID-19 outbreak, healthcare institutions like Center for Disease Control and Prevention and World Health Organization recommends application of qualitative research approach when case numbers from a disease is significantly high. Leach et al. Note, qualitative research as well positioned is to effectively utilize the diverse information from diverse geographical, climatic, and other sources enhance opportunities of gathering variety of data and employment of various expertises to better comprehend the cause. Study of Dodds and Hayes attempted to analyze the advantages and challenges of virtual interview of groups comprising old and young vulnerable individuals and their caregivers. From conducted interview involving 35 participants, the researchers identified comfort, non-intrusive, engaging, safe, and easy as the major advantages of group interviews online. Challenges identified were lack of face-to-face communication, accessibility issues, setup issues, and erosion of privacy. Yet, in comparative trade-off, advantages appear to overweigh positioning virtual interviews appropriate at this hour. So now, to summarize my discussion, the growing acceptance of qualitative research in communication is well edged by the different studies done of the subject. Suggestions of Hall, Park, Dewey are emerging relevant in the volatility of our pandemic state. Qualitative research has emerged as a prominent approach in mass media research, and its adaptation for online content is appropriate. Selection of optimal method enables researchers to gather potentially rich information, enhancing study conclusions. In addition, selection of concepts and constructs and variable is vital for researchers to focus on. Development of social media has subsequently opened up avenues for researchers to gather data and conduct studies on diverse subjects. Yet, this seems to be an evolving application and therefore requires careful scrutiny by researchers in determining concepts, variables, and the best fit way to gather relevant data for analysis. Thank you so much for listening to me for such a long time.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much. It was really the total presentation was really very enlightening. Very enlightening. It as Jatin sir's presentation was like it could bring almost every part of the quantitative research, and your presentation similarly the qualitative aspects from the history to various models and how those methods are applicable, the examples, I mean it was really very enlightening, and students do have some questions, I believe. Ma'am, with your permission, can we take some questions if
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are questions for Dr. Srivastava also. I saw
Hmm,
that while, yeah, I
hmm,
think.
hmm. Uh, sir, sir,
Jatin has
yeah.
already answered. Like,
Mhm, mhm. Sir told me that due to certain emergency meeting, he
yes,
is joining any other online meeting platform. So,
yes, yes.
and and ma'am, I believe students are writing some questions. I could see, and then we can take certain questions. But uh, the area which you spoke was really like there are some aspects even I like. I was taking note of. If anyone has if anyone has questions, you can directly ask questions to ma'am. If you all are resisting for writing, you can directly ma'am.
In
Student.
fact, Akash, I have given my email ID also. So maybe
Mhm.
actually it's too long a session. So if they have question, they can send it to you and you can send it to me also, right? So
Okay,
that is,
okay, ma'am.
yeah.
Sure. And so today, uh, today we are officially calling an end for this uh, first day of the 2 days webinar. And uh, before calling it an end, I would propose my thanks to both of our honorable speakers, our resource persons, Dr. Jatin Srivastava sir and Dr. Mausumi Bhattacharyya ma'am. Madam, your presence and your presentation both has enriched and enlightened us and has honored all of us. On behalf of the Department of Journalism Mass Communication of our college, I propose a vote of thanks to all the honorable uh, dignitaries present here. I would thank our honorable principal, sir, Dr. Poddar, for always supporting us in endeavors, in such academic endeavors like this. And I would thank our IQSC coordinator, Dr. Arvind Pan, for his inaugural address. I would also thank my colleagues from the department who are there in the team of the uh, organizing this webinar. I would like to thank all my esteemed colleagues from the fraternity. I would like to thank all the research scholars and my beloved students for their patient hearing. And before we would end, I would again thank Madam for enriching us and for throwing light on certain aspects of qualitative research which were not known to many of us. With this, we would we would close today's session, and we are sharing a feedback form for today. Students and participants can the feedback form has been posted in the chat box. You can kindly fill this feedback form. It will be open till 10 o'clock. So you should, and please, it's a request to the students that please kindly write your name in the name column, because I have seen students do write my name sometimes and sometimes resource person's name. So it is for students. Please write your name in the name column so that we can generate certificates after the completion of the webinar, and it will take some time in processing of webinar, so please have patience with us. Ma'am, somebody has oh acha, acha. They are complimenting.
Yeah.
There are students who are sending their feedbacks.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank,
Thank you so much, Akash. And thanks to you and
thank,
your college. Okay. Good night to everyone.
thank you, ma'am. Good night. Good
to
night.
all participants also.
Thank you, ma'am. Good night. Good night, everyone.
सुंदर ही है ना, कहाँ कही है?